Ghanaians will have a say into whether or not Ghana should commit fully to an economic partnership agreement with the European Union. Civil society and trade opposition to the planned move is based on concerns that the playing field is uneven and opens Africa up to continued plunder of her natural resources. The EU has set a deadline of October for African nations to decide. But what will happen if they don't decide? Nigeria has called for more discussion of the terms. So why is the Ghanaian government so keen? This week, Africa Today asks if EPAs are just another form of exploitation.
The big question at last month's EU-Africa summit was whether more African countries would sign economic partnership agreements. There have been 11 years of tense negotiations over this, with Nigeria refusing to sign because they claim these agreements force African countries to open up their markets to unfair competition. Ghana has been operating under a temporary EPA for the last 7 years. Its President John Mahama faces fierce resistance at home, with warnings that Africa's first independent country could be opening itself up to a neo-colonial trade invasion from European products to the long-term detriment of its people. So which way should Ghana go? That's what we'll be asking on this week's Africa Today.
A warm welcome to Africa Today with me, Vuiswang Mobongwana. Considering the legacy of colonialism and Africa's lack of economic freedom since the era of independence, it's perhaps not surprising that EPAs are viewed with much suspicion. But what exactly are the terms of the agreement? And is it fair to say that Ghana is selling out to the EU? Discussing this with Africa Today are Mr. Frank Anderson, who is the managing partner at the Network for Diaspora Professionals, Kofi Mawuli-Klu, who is the Chief Executive Commissioner at Pan-Afri Indaba, and on the line from the City of London is the journalist Tete Kofi. Welcome you all. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
If I could start with you, Frank, what exactly are the benefits and, more importantly, the costs of these EPAs to African countries?
Well, to put it on record, my head is against, my heart is against the EPA. But my heart is telling me, under the present circumstances, it makes more sense to sign the EPA now and then prepare for, the future consequences. And so, one, we're betraying what Nkrumah stood for Africa, the vision and the goal for Africa. But then the circumstances we find ourselves right now, looking at the over-reliance on normal traditional exports, it makes sense to sign the EPA now.
But what does it commit Ghana to, for example? Does it not tie the country for decades to come?
It does, but let's be real. Most of the things that we are complaining about, we don't produce for example, in Ghana. The plants, the equipment, the medical equipment, medical supply. We don't produce those stuffs in Ghana. Companies that there are very little companies that are produce. Ghana is a very import-reliant country as we speak, and so for me, my head is telling me, for the short and medium term, yes, it is a good deal. For the longer term, it damages Ghana's ability to compete at a global level, produce goods and services that will be consumed not only locally, but internationally.
But, I mean, this question is really crucial for Ghana's long-term economic well-being, if I could come to you, Kofi. But have you noticed, you've just recently come back from Ghana, that Ghanaians themselves are discussing what the implications of these EPAs are?
No. Until recently, there was no discussion, not from government officials, not from civil society organizations, about the EPA. Actually, it was international NGOs, Friends of the Earth, Action Aid, Christian Aid, CAFOR, they were discussing EPA and have been doing so for some time now. But on the ground in Ghana, despite the worsening economic situation, despite the general hopelessness around, the government has not been talking about this. Even academia, in terms of research, has not been talking about this. The media has not been talking about this in terms of investigative journalism. They've all gone into the pettiness of local politicking, with all the gossips and the nonsense that goes with it. When actually, for all these years, Ghana has been actually practicing an interim, EPA that
for the last 7 years.
That has been responsible for the worsening economic situation. Ghana's currency is really, really in a very hopeless situation. The country increasingly has privatized all its public, virtually all of its public enterprises and institutions. And we have a situation where even toothpick, as they say, is being imported. Almost everything is being. This is a country when in the 60s, when we were children, was producing television, was producing quite a lot of things. Was produced. Even cars were being assembled, in Ghana. A lot was happening, but through largely state enterprise. All of this has gone. And now we have been practicing this interim EPA by stealth without the governments that have come and gone, being very open about it, to the people and having a discussion. Okay. There has not been even any proper consultation up till now.
Okay, well, let's have a look at another point of view around what the last 7 years has actually meant to Ghana with regard to EPAs, Tete. From what you have noticed, has it made a huge difference? And do you feel that the EPAs were introduced, as Kofi is implying, by some kind of stealth?
Well, it's a good way of putting it, the introduction of EPAs by stealth, in that it's quite analogous, strangely enough, to the situation of the United Kingdom and its participation in the EC. Actually, the vast majority of the population has a lot of disquiet but doesn't really understand the nuts and bolts of the thing. Here's the thing. The road to hell is definitely paved with good intentions, because the EPA on paper is a wonderful idea. But with all these things, the devil lies in the detail. I was not able to find one single person who could come out, bang their chest, thump the table, and say that, yes, the EP way is the way out of our salvation. The reality is, there have been lots of cases where shipments have been made to Europe and returned to Ghana and destroyed because they didn't meet the standards. The trade unions, by and large, feel that the EPA is not working in their favor. And now there is a bit of a buzz in business circles, which is saying that if the Nigerians, the biggest or perhaps the second biggest economy in the whole of Africa, don't feel they're ready to sign the EPA, then who on earth is Ghana to think they can step up to the plate and bat? The bottom line for me, Voicewell, is that I'm seeing that the EPA will long-term guarantee security of raw materials to the EC. However, I think that the EC is not factoring in the fact that Ghana's development ambitions go beyond just being a safe and secure supplier of raw materials. Ghana wants to develop into producing material and adding value, and the EPA may be the biggest block to that objective.
And what do you think about the potential for building up the infrastructure of the country? Because that's the root of the problem. Like you were saying earlier, we can't trade in the way we want to amongst each other because we do not have the infrastructure.
You're absolutely right. And I quite agree with my colleague. But we need to be realistic in, there's two ways of looking at this. Look at it passionately, but look at the figures. The recent statistics show that non-traditional export, we made about $3 billion, is increased from $600 million to $3 billion. That's non-traditional exports. We know our cocoa and gold is falling. The prices are falling. So revenue of $1.6 billion have fallen. SEPA, which is one of the civil society organizations, has done a very extensive research on this issue. Now, if we were not to sign the EPA, what happens is that those non-traditional exports will be losing the European market. 40% of Ghana's export goes into the European Union. But here's the catch. I think over time, the ECOWAS has been pussyfooting for so long a time. We haven't traded within ourselves as ECOWAS as much as we could have. It's just about 15%. And if Ghana stands to lose, because one, Nigeria is a big player. Nigeria has a vast population. Nigeria's oil, export revenue comes from oil and liquefied petroleum gas.
Are you saying Nigeria can afford to be belligerent and to say no, but Ghana cannot?
That's precisely the point I'm making, because Nigeria has diversified its export. Recently, they signed a deal with China to supply gas, liquefied gas, and so on and so forth. So Nigeria is a big player, and EU imports 24% of Nigeria's LPG, into Europe. And so Nigeria can afford to boast. But here's the issue for Ghana. There are 3 African countries that are, according to CEPA, that are least developed countries. What it means is that these least developed countries, with or without signing EPA, will still export into Europe tariff-free with no restrictions. But the case for Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and Nigeria is different, because they're not within those category of countries I mentioned. What happens is that because Nigeria has so much clout, Ghana will be left alone. Cote d'Ivoire is part of the UEMOE, that's the West African Economic Monetary Union. That's another subgroup within the ECOWAS.
Yes.
And majority of those countries are within the what you call the least developed countries. They will import and export to Europe, tariff-free. So really, Ghana is in a very precarious position. The truth is that the long-term effect of EPA is damaging to Ghana's economy. But within the present circumstance we find ourselves, it makes more sense reading from what CEPA, the work that CEPA and groups like Imani have done, to sign now. Meanwhile, prepare at the end of this deal to ensure that industries are lifted up, create the environment for them to succeed, give them. And the other challenge is that local companies in Ghana find it difficult to raise revenue or funding to invest in their equipment and so on and so forth.
Right.
So government has to make a deliberate effort right now to invest in those productive sectors so that we can create a market within Ghana and then West Africa. Do
you think Mahama, the president, is actually being lazy in terms of his own responsibility to the country by not focusing on these internal dynamics that needed to be shored up so that at least Ghana can negotiate from a position of strength?
Well, I really think that it's not just Mahama, but the NDC government that has a second term, in governance, has been extremely, very, very lazy, extremely economical with the truth, and has really been, trying to behave like an ostrich burying its head in the sands. Because with the 7 years of carrying out the interim partnership agreement, in fact, that very signing of the interim partnership agreement should have been the point at which we started preparing, not to sign the full one in the light of the havoc that it's wreaking. Let's face it, Ghana is a neo-colony, right? And our economy, as people have said, it's a Gettysburg economy because we've hardly done anything about it. Now, signing this agreement, is actually going to worsen the situation where we will never even have the chance to lift off. That is why there is a view that why don't we use the current situation with Nigeria, unprecedentedly, taking a major stance against it. Why don't we unite our efforts? Because we can only defeat this situation with a united effort.
Let's talking about a united effort.
Not happening.
Let me bring you in, Tete, on that united effort. Why is there this reluctance? And surely it has something to do with the legacy of colonialism, but it can't just be that. Why couldn't the Ghanaian government, as Kofi is suggesting, have actually looked at Nigeria's position and thought, you know what? We need to stand behind and listen carefully to our fellow African country and see if we can work together and speak with one voice on this.
I wouldn't even blame the colonial legacy. I think that this is an inherent failure of every democratic political system. Governments act in what is their near-term personal best interest, not necessarily in the interest of what is wider in the nation. But here's the thing. If you look at its very fundament, the EC suggests that the reason we've set up this EPA is to help sustainable development in Africa. Okay. To achieve that, you are going to need to have clear objectives about how the new institutions which are required to monitor the agreement are going to be resourced, We are going to have clear ideas about where the finances are going to come from. Right now, there's a huge discussion. Should it come from the European Development Fund, or should these funds be generated and drawn through internally? We need to establish development benchmarks, because without a benchmark, you don't know whether or not the EPA is working for you or whether it's leading you down a rocky road.
Okay.
And finally, we need to have agreement about development priorities. Now, I don't care which way you slice this as to whether or not Ghana needs to be in the EPA or not.
Okay.
Nobody signs an agreement without some baseline issues being established, and none of them have been established.
Well, okay, well, let's actually talk. We'll talk more about what should have been done, and more likely, more importantly, I should say, what Africa can do next. Can they speak in any kind of unified form around the EPAs? And I think, Kofi, you meant EU when you earlier said EC. But before we get to that, let's have a look at what you've been saying on our Facebook fan page. And the first comment is coming from Irvins Mapesu. Irvins is from Zimbabwe, and Irvins says that many African economies are still backed up by EU countries. The West, in turn, needs Africa's rich resources. In order to build a better world and future for all, the EU needs to start treating Africa as an equal partner. Indeed, that's the question. Is Africa being treated as an equal partner in these arrangements? The second comment is coming from Kwame Frimpong. Kwame says that Ghana should follow Nigeria's lead and stand up for its local businesses, especially the manufacturers who would suffer greatly as a result. And a final thought from Kwaku Mensah. Kwaku says that Ghana would be foolish to go down the route of more permanent EPAs. They would be locking themselves into an agreement that would never be equal. Yes, Ghana is doing well against some of its fellow African nations, but it still doesn't have the infrastructure and financial clout to compete with EU member states. Indeed, can Africa unite in a more cohesive way? Perhaps the regions could come together around this issue. What do you think? Let us know, and there are a number of ways you can do so. Have a look at this.
Keep your thoughts coming in. You can email us or text us. Go to our Facebook fan page. Or you can follow us on Twitter.
Economic partnership agreements, but on what terms, and is the playing field actually level? Let me come to you, Frank. What exactly, just give us some nitty-gritty details about the goods and the services that Ghanaians have been able to export to Europe and what benefits they've gotten from that.
To a very large extent, I agree with Mr. Klu. The deal is not on level playing field, but I am using my head, looking at the present circumstances, looking at the figures. Now, Ghana's largest import revenue comes from gold, which is about 5 billion a year. Next is the new farm oil, just 3 years ago. It used to be cocoa, but now cocoa has been overtaken by non-traditional exports into the same European Union under the 2007 agreement.
What non-traditional exports, for example?
What do you call it? Local fabrics,
okay.
You name it.
Okay.
Our major export is
Fruits.
gold and cocoa and fruits,
yes.
and so on and so forth.
Right.
Now, that has overtaken cocoa, according to SEPA, research done by SEPA. Now, if we were not to sign the EU Pact, what it means is that those non-traditional exports would be attracting tariffs. Where are you going to get, and it's projected that within the next 2 to 3 years, 2015, 2016, Ghana should be making about $5 billion from just, these products. And so, in the present circumstances, we don't produce equipment, we don't produce tractor, we don't produce medical supplies, we don't produce medical equipment. And these are some of the things we spend heavy money importing under the present circumstances. With or without, EPA, we'll still be importing them anyway. Okay. So why don't you rather take advantage of the European market, which you export about 40% of your exports to, rather expand the non-traditional products, make a lot more money, whilst you're preparing the ground for ECOWAS integration, proper ECOWAS integration, preparing the grounds for local manufacturing industries, propping them up, building capacity, investing in them for the longer term?
Well, that is the question, isn't it? If I could come back to you very quickly, Tete. The concerns on the local level, the local traders, various associations, civil society organizations in Ghana are vehemently against this. Is this really just the result of them being totally ignored in this process? Or do you see some potential for their involvement further down the line?
Well, I have to say that I've been talking to a group of students all morning about the EC, and that's why the name constantly comes up. Of course, we're talking about the EU. But you see, that the problem with this issue is that once you sign the EPA in substantive form, you are locked into an agreement without any safety net going for a long time into the future. I think that in principle, the idea that we might as well be in the EPA because actually we're not making a lot of money from adding a lot of value to our raw materials. This is a very attractive one. However, I wouldn't sign an EPA if it guaranteed that my economy was going to be stuck at a level of primary resources, i.e. producing raw materials ad infinitum into the future. The point is, even having signed the EPA, look at the immediate outputs in Ghana. Things are extremely difficult. You can't see any visible progress. Yeah. And the number of people who are writing in now to say that actually it's not a level playing field, this is very much the experience of people on the ground in Ghana.
Right, right. And let's come to the legacy of Ghana as an African nation, the inspiration that a lot of Africans gained when Ghana became the first independent African nation, and the numerous writings of Kwame Nkrumah. Is it fair to say that his legacy is being betrayed?
Definitely. That describes the situation, because there's nothing happening in Ghana, West Africa, or all over Africa today that Nkrumah did not predict. Nkrumah pointed out in Africa Must Unite that if we didn't take those steps, this is where we will end. And if you read particularly the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, where he takes an analysis of what has occurred in Africa leading to the overthrow of his own government and the way forward, he predicted what we now have is Europe trying to recolonize Africa after we've been marking time in the quagmire of neocolonialism. So it's getting worse because Europe haven't seen that we are not moving forward, precisely because it's blocked violently our attempt to move forward. We've been stuck in neocolonialism. Now it's on a genocidal path of reversing the gains of our independence struggle to direct recolonization, where they take more direct control of our economy and give us no room. This is a genocidal, ecocidal way that Europe has planned for a lot against which we've been forward. Now we also have the answers in terms of the way forward. And the way forward is really to look at the politics of the situation. The politics should come first and foremost, and that is the problem. The bankruptcy of politics in Ghana and Africa today is the huge problem, because we are faced with imperialism that is on a revanchist path. But we are not having the politics of anti-imperialism, the politics of Pan-Africanism. And that is the problem.
I'm afraid time is against us, and I do have to interrupt you, regrettably, Frank. And maybe the deadline coming up in October will bring the discussion that Kofi is dying to hear, that actually looks at the nitty-gritty issue of economics and economic independence. We'll definitely be keeping you up to date, and I'm afraid that is all the time we have for Africa Today. Do keep sending your comments to us. You can see the email address on the screen right now that you can write to. You can text us, and don't forget we're also on Twitter. A huge thanks to today's guests, Frank Anderson, Kofi Mawuli-Klu, and Tete Kofi. Join us next week for another edition of Africa Today. But from me, Vuiswang Ngobongwana, on behalf of the team, thank you so much for watching.